Welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast, where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the learning and development industry. As always, we'll be bringing some laughter and a bit of fun along the way, but more importantly, you'll get some incredible insights, key lessons, and unique perspectives on everything related and possibly unrelated to training and development. Let's get this show on the road. Hello everybody and welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast. And this is the start of our new season 3, and today I have a pretty interesting conversation. I've got Susannah Davda joining me, who is the founder of The Shoe Consultant. And this is essentially, she works with startup shoe brands and essentially gives them support and guidance from someone who's an expert in the industry. She's been working in the industry since 1998 and helping people to start shoe brands since she launched the Shoe Consultant in 2015. She's just launched her second course, How to Photograph Shoes to Sell, this year. And I think it's going to be an interesting conversation just to look at how she's positioned learning and development within her business model. So, Susannah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, Jason.
So let's just jump straight in. Your journey and kind of how education fits into it. Just take us on that little ride through your past.
Sure. So I started working in the shoe business, as you say, in 1998, which was when I got a job in a shoe shop. And I had been really quite interested in fashion at that point, but working in a shoe shop opened my eyes to the world of shoes. I then had to kind of figure out how I could get on a footwear design degree course, which involved a bit of extra learning, let's say, to try and get a portfolio together, because I was doing a BTEC in performing arts, nothing to do with shoes or fashion. And so I did my 3 years learning to make shoes, design shoes, like pattern cutting, and some of the kind of history elements as well, some of the more academic elements. And I realised I was quite commercially minded. I did some work experience at a buying office and was like, okay, I want to be a buyer. So when I got a job, I got a job in, it was kind of combined design and buying. And that was tricky to move on from because it wasn't either. And so then I worked in product management for a big global shoe brand for 8 years. And I just got that feeling of really wanting to work for myself, but also do something that I felt would be helping other people. So I was saving money, trying to figure out, what I could offer the world from a business perspective, me on my own, and saved up enough money that I could start actually taking some risks and experimenting really with what could my knowledge do, and who needed my knowledge most in the world. So that's how the Shoe Consultant came to being. It started up and it was kind of a website with an array of different services, actually, customer facing and also B2B.
So tell me, when did the education courses come into kind of your service offering, and how did that come about?
So that's a good question. So I had been consulting one-to-one with shoe startups, which turned out that was the thing that people wanted and needed. And I'd been doing that for about 4 years, and then realised that I needed to put my prices up. I wasn't charging enough. And B, that would mean that actually not everybody would be able to afford to work with me one-to-one. So I thought, okay, maybe I can package up a lot of the skills, the knowledge, the templates that I'd been creating when I'd been working one-to-one with clients into a course that would be a more accessible way to work with me. So I say that's 4 years in, but actually it took me a year to create that course. I wanted it to be extremely thorough. I wanted to be able to make it a really, really useful tool to as many people as possible, make it video rich, and have a lot of people contribute to that course as well. So it wasn't just me kind of talking to camera, but it was people who'd been there, done that, started a shoe brand, who'd be able to contribute. So that course, has been running since 2020. The pandemic hit and I was kind of nearly there with the course. And then I was like, okay, everyone's sitting at home taking courses. So I had to kind of make it happen that year. So it launched in June 2020. And then my second course actually was also a year in the making, how to photograph shoes to sell. And I just launched that one this year. But my courses have been a way of people accessing knowledge that you can't just find on YouTube. You can't just find, somewhere on the internet. The shoe industry and shoes in general, for some reason, it's just not readily available information. Maybe people feel like it's too niche, but I love this niche.
Sounds great. I mean, I'm very curious as to someone who didn't have an educational background, and I think it's often, I think, what a lot of people who go into the consulting industry come across very quickly or early on in their careers is that we have finite amounts of time, and the consulting business is one of the ones that suffer from a scale problem because obviously we haven't managed to bend the space-time continuum yet, not for lack of trying. So I'm, as someone who didn't have that background of education, who had a buying background, fine arts background, how was that journey for you? Because I think a lot of people are fascinated about not only how education courses are created, but how they're commercialized as well. And that must have been a really interesting journey.
Yeah, it really was. I think I've always been quite methodical, which is definitely an attribute that helps when you're creating a course. So, starting with a course outline, what are the modules that I want to cover? That is really actually my comfort zone. The other thing that I do a lot of is, really just putting myself in other people's shoes. I had that experience of working with clients, so I knew what they needed at each point of their startup journey, creating a shoe brand, for example, with my first course. And I just created the resources that they needed at that particular point. Could I create a course that was nothing to do with shoes or photographing shoes? I don't know if those are transferable skills. I guess I've just got this in-depth knowledge of, I guess also how people like to learn, how I like to learn. Video-rich content for me is particularly important. But yeah, also a very human approach and very kind of, I don't know, it's all about them. It's not about me, and it's not about, how I want to deliver the course. It's, okay, what do they need? What do they need at this point? And making sure it's a logical structure and it feels like it flows. That's really important to me.
And does that transition from working on the course, finishing the course, having your labor of love in front of you, and then realizing now I've got to find people who actually need to do this course, and that journey from completing the course to kind of making it a revenue generating tool for you. Take us through that journey. I mean, how was that for you? Was it an easy journey? Were you kind of anxious about it? Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think with my first course, there were actually people on my mailing list or in my network who were waiting for it. And of course I'd kind of teased it and let them know it would be it would be happening eventually. And so my first few sign-ups were people who, knew and were waiting. But actually there's been some longevity to the course, and the courses that I create are evergreen. They're not live, they're recorded. But with my first course, you do get access to me one-to-one for a bit of time as well. But yeah, I think it's easy to think, okay, I need a massive launch and I need loads of people signing up on that first day or I've failed. And actually, I think if you're creating evergreen content, if you're creating evergreen courses, then there's a certain amount of just sort of patience and persistence, and think about focusing on the SEO. I am continuing to create content that is relevant to my how to start a shoe brand online course. Actually, sometimes when I have initial calls with people who may be one-to-one clients or maybe not, sometimes actually the course is perfect for them and I can point them in that direction. And that's fine, that works. Maybe I sense that they're on a bit of a budget, or they just really like to work independently, and it's just good that I've got that alternative. But I do get organic sign-ups as well, and I think that that's the kind of SEO focus. Now, as for my new course, How to Photograph Shoes to Sell, that's been a slightly different one. I created it because I had written a blog post all about how to photograph shoes for eBay a few years ago, and the traffic from that, the web traffic from that has been huge. And it's not a great blog post. It's really not. And so I was like, well, if all these people are coming to this blog post for this knowledge, they're obviously not finding it elsewhere. So how can I help them by creating a much more thorough, in-depth course with a shoe photographer, really talented photographer? And we've got some beautiful examples in there. How can I sort of direct that traffic into revenue generating, but also just a better product for them? And it's been a challenge, actually, directing that traffic to the new course. I'm still working on it. I've been working on a Google ad campaign, but also trying to get as many inbound links as possible. So my SEO strategy. And just being patient and persistent and trying a few things. I think, playing, iterating, seeing what works, changing the price for a bit, and just, keeping the faith. I know that people need this. And it's just that when you create something so niche, but you kind of think, actually, well, anyone in the world who's English speaking could find this really, really helpful. That doesn't really fit with an advertising budget. You can't afford to run a Google ad that's global as a small business. You just can't. So you have to start small and then scale up. So I'm in that process at the moment, but it's an interesting one.
I mean, and just looking back, I think there's a lot of people who are starting similar journeys. They're people who've got wealth of experience, have probably had a similar scale problem, or have even written a book or something and want a education course to follow behind that, who are probably starting this journey. I'm very curious. I mean, you've given a really lovely description of the journey that you've gone on. But just thinking back, is there one thing that you wish you knew back then that you know now?
Part of me thinks I wish I hadn't spent so long creating the courses, but I'm so proud of what I have created. I think that's just been my process. But I will say that the first 6 months, there was a lot of procrastination. And there's something about a deadline that really works well for me. And it can be very stressful towards the end. I think I wish that there was some way, and maybe there is and I just haven't come across it, where, I knew what I needed to create and the order in which I needed to do everything. But having the motivation, amongst all of the other things, of course, that I'm doing in my business, my membership group, my one-to-one clients, my other course, having that motivation to kind of keep some momentum actually at the beginning, that I would love some advice actually on how to do a bit more at the outset, and so there's less of a pinch point at the end, I guess. So I'd love to give some advice on that. I mean, apart from don't do what I did, I'm not sure. Jason, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's a problem I empathize with. I made the probably terrible decision to do a master's degree at one stage during my life, and realized that the hardest part was when you get to your thesis or dissertation, nobody gives you a deadline. Ooh. And I got into the kind of perfectionist analysis paralysis, and I ended up rewriting the entire thing probably like over 10 times, because you go back to something, you look at it and you go, this is garbage, let's start again. So I'm not a great person to give advice on that. In fact, quite the opposite. But I have been told that accountability coaches work quite well in these kind of scenarios. And having someone who's going to kind of hold you accountable and give you deadlines is I mean, it works for me. So without a deadline, I know exactly how hard it is to get stuff done. I'm the guy who kind of waits for the last minute and then basically like gets the thing across the finish line. So I wish I was more of a procrastinator than a procrastinator, but I guess it's just the difficulty of doing things that you don't have a deadline for. I'm sure that there are people out there who would have great advice. Mine would just be it's like when people write books, right? They go to publishers and publishers give them deadlines, and it's nice to kind of have that focus. But I would say that the best thing I've seen is to actually have do your kind of structure, because this is what I was taught with writing a book is do your chapter structure, and then put calendar like meetings in for each kind of step of the way from here to your first draft. And that way you've kind of already planned the thing out, and you've got these sections where you're actually going to sit down and apply your mind. It's just a case of whether that other little voice in your head goes, you know what, you don't really have to do it right now, there's plenty of time still, you've got to have that discipline.
That makes sense. I guess the other thing actually that can make it a little bit difficult to plan a course is that you don't always know how long each element is going to take you. You may find that something like video editing or even the video recording, if you've actually got quite a long script to record, which I had actually on both of my courses, that can take a really long time. And so you might have these best laid plans, which I had of a calendar, how long these things were going to take, and therefore when I could launch, and then realize that is so unrealistic. What you thought would take you a week is going to take you 6 weeks. And I think, I certainly learned some things from one course to the next, but I wonder if there's some advice about just plan for it to take twice as long as you think it's going to take.
Well, I think that's, again, it's a universal kind of truth, is that whenever, was it Bill Gates who said, like, what we often overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in 5 or 10. I can't remember what his timeline was. But I think, in my world, which is kind of software development and technology, I always say that a project consists of two parts: the first 90% and then the second 90%. Because when you get to that last 10%, you realize that you've completely underestimated what it takes to get something over the finish line. I think that it's actually very brave for someone to kind of step into that space where they're using technology, they're using tools that they're not comfortable with. It's that kind of growth mindset, that willingness to experiment and try and learn and not be daunted by the fact that I don't really understand these tools, I don't know how they work, and therefore, I'm going to kind of find ways not to necessarily go and do stuff in that space. So, I think that we've all got to go through that learning curve, and we're better off for it. And I think there's brave people who undertake that challenge, and people who are too daunted by it. I think it's anything from a bit of imposter syndrome to just a debilitating fear of technology or doing something that you don't feel comfortable doing. I've got a few people who specifically focus on that space in coaching, helping people who've been in an industry for 20, 30 years, who've now kind of decided that they're going to retire and then want to do something with their lives. They're kind of, it's almost like they've got that fixed mindset, and it's being able to say, actually, you can do all of this stuff. Just try, and you'll find that it's actually not as scary or daunting or complicated or difficult as you thought if you just take that first step.
Yeah, and actually a certain amount of, let's say, naive optimism can be really helpful in business, especially from a startup point of view. And I think people who are willing to admit what they don't know and then look for help and be humble to a certain extent and just quite open, can be helpful.
I love that phrase you use, naive optimism. I think it's actually it's a very powerful I suppose just kind of observation to have is sometimes I think the more we tend to think about things, the more we tend to talk ourselves out of doing something. In your mind though, with that, I've always seen it as a balance. I mean, if we're too intuitive and we just dive in without thinking about something, there's a good chance that it's going to end up leading to kind of disappointment or to kind of maybe an underwhelming experience. Thinking back on it, how did you balance up that kind of almost that informed, like, logical leap that you made with that that kind of bit of naivety in the process, but that kind of that belief that this is what I want to do, this is what I think is going to work. How did you kind of handle that process in your head along the way?
That's a good question. I don't know if I really did. And I think I didn't think about it in that way. I guess I was fairly single-minded with both of my courses of, this is the purpose of the course. These are the people who it's going to help. I'm the person who needs to make this happen. And making sure that it did what it needed to do was the main focus for me. Obviously, I got in my own way to a certain extent, particularly, as I said at the beginning. But I knew what needed to be done. It was more just, it couldn't always be a priority in my work and life. And that's, I think, where the procrastination came in. But then also, I think, people always say that procrastination is about fear. And, what if this doesn't work? What if this does work? It could be life-changing. It could be business-changing. So yeah, it's an interesting combination. I don't think any one person is going to be in any one of those places for the whole of the journey of creating a course. For example, you're going to go through different phases. You're going to go through phases when you, particularly at the start, when you're sort of super motivated. Right, I'm going to do this. You know, you've probably been thinking about it for a while, and then you think, right, okay, so I'm going to create a structure. I'm going to contact these people. I'm going to do these things, and then there'll be a time at which you've got so much going on that it can't be a priority, and then that perhaps goes on longer than you've actually got so much going on. And then you learn to procrastinate about it, and you get kind of stuck in that routine, in that rut of, you know, for me, I use Asana for my project management, and I kind of move a task to the next week or move a task to the next day. It is too easy, you know. They should kind of come up with some kind of you're not going to reach your goal if you move this task again.
Asana shaming, yes.
Exactly, yeah. I know. Yeah, they do give you a fun little animation when you've ticked off a task, but perhaps they should tell you, did you know you've moved this task, 6 times?
This is your third time, yeah.
Exactly.
It's like your parent. I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed.
Oh, wow.
So when I come back, because I think that there's something in your journey which is something I want to just kind of focus on for a bit, is the journey you took was it was an informed journey. And what I quite like about yours is that in both courses there was an underpinning kind of data gathering process in place. So for your first course, it was because you had people who were actually wanting your knowledge. You discovered that you needed to charge more, and they would have been below the budget, and they actively expressed interest in doing a course. So you kind of had that pre-validation, and then at least that kind of gives you some kind of confirmation that what you're doing is something that's going to be useful. And in the second one, you do, I think it was really interesting to see that you used data. So you looked at a blog post on the same subject and saw, wow, it's doing really well, and you use that almost as a catalyst to create the course.
And even to the point actually of using so Google search console and using the search terms that people had used actually to get to that blog post to create the course. Okay, what are people looking for? Okay, how can I answer this in the course? So it was very data driven.
So there's something really interesting about this is sometimes people go from, and I'm guilty of this because I've done it many times in my past, go from basically nothing to kind of creating this massive, pristine, like shoo-ah, whiz-bang thing. And there's many times I've been told, and of course I didn't listen because who listens to advice, right? That sometimes it's just about doing something small and testing. And I think a lot of people out there who are looking at building their own courses, trying to monetize their own courses, there's a lot of value, I think, in your story in terms of you don't necessarily always even have to start at the course. If you spend a lot of time on something that isn't in any way proven, or you haven't got some kind of validation up front, you're taking a big risk, right? Because it may or may not be successful. But by just getting out there and doing little kind of blog posts, and you talked about a newsletter as well. I mean, I can't think of many people who are disciplined enough to do that newsletter every single week, but it's a great example of how you can kind of get that pre-validation, that data that almost kind of drives that process. And my question, because I've finally come to it, is along the way, how does that kind of galvanize you? Because I know that when we get really busy, and there's a whole bunch of things on our plate, and we're thinking, this would be nice, but actually I've got paying customers who are expecting me to do work for them. How does that kind of influence the process when you know that you've actually got people who will be using this thing at the end and are potentially waiting for it or going to see value in it? Was that something that you leaned on a bit to help motivate you through the process?
Yeah, I think so. And also, as you're coming to the end, when you are beginning to market what is going to be coming up, so you're talking about the upcoming course release, then of course that is holding you accountable even more, because you've told people, and you've told people when, potentially as well, when it's going to happen, and you've sort of trained them or asked them to wait for you. So I found, particularly towards the end, it was very motivating, because if people were saying that they were excited about it, or actually with both courses I completed I think 2 or 3 modules of the course and gave them away for free to some people who I knew would give me some video testimonials about it. So actually having their viewpoint and hearing how much they appreciated the content that I had given them, that was also really motivating, because I was like, this is worth doing. Okay, people do really need it, and it helps me to get to that point where I completed it. It's interesting what you were saying about kind of validating it, and that's a really kind of sound way to build a course. But I think even with that, there's still a leap of faith.
Oh, yeah.
But that people will buy it in course format, even if they've said they will. They may not. And I think, another thing that I did, I think that sort of reminded me about what you were talking about, was when I started my membership group for people starting shoe brands. Actually, that started in a different form, and it was going to be just monthly paid masterclasses. And what I realised was that every single month I would have to do this whole big marketing campaign just to get people to pay, a little bit of money, a one-off payment for a live video masterclass. And so at that point I realised, okay, if I package this and create a membership where every month we have a live masterclass and we have some meetups and we have a Facebook group, and then that's the way to of course I still market the membership, but I don't have to do this big marketing machine every time. So I do think in business and in course creation or kind of service-based products, let's say, you've got to be kind of open to the sort of feedback or the data, whether it's kind of people telling you things or it's data telling you things. If you're not listening, you're not going to make any money, or you're not going to be able to scale your business. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, so I completely agree. I mean, I think I always tell people that no new idea in the history of mankind has ever been proven to be successful in advance. So no matter how much data we have, nothing is guaranteed. But obviously, the more data you have, the more you can make an inference that something is going to be successful. So I just want to point out that you probably answered your earlier question, because I love that that you actually said in that you made an announcement as to when the course was going to be available. And I think there's 2 things there which I think are very powerful. Is one, we sometimes hide behind the fact that nobody knows about something, and therefore the stakes are very low. The moment you put something out into the world, the dynamic changes quite significantly, because then you're kind of putting your reputation on the line. Then you've put something out there and you've made a commitment, and that really actually suddenly now puts you in a position where you actually have to follow through on your promise. And by putting a date of when it's going to be available, well, you've just set your deadline. And so it's a very powerful mechanism to use. And I think more people can take a lesson from that. As I think it's very comforting for us, whether we're working on a book or a keynote talk or a course, that we'll do it, in the background and work on it and chip away at it. But I think it's, if you're really serious about it, tell people out there that this thing is going to happen, because then then you've kind of, you've set the wheels in motion. So that was a great kind of insight. But the thing I want to just jump on is you've kind of talked about another element of what it takes really to kind of start to run a successful education business capability, and that's community. So it's I imagine it's quite difficult for people to, you've got Coursera's and like Linda's and all of these other kind of platforms that you can go and put a course on, and you've got access to a community. But obviously there's pros and cons with that approach. And the whole build it and they will come often never works. So tell us a little bit about that kind of community journey, and how you kind of started on that journey, and what some of your big challenges have been, because you talked about that monthly masterclass, which is obviously a big commitment, but underpinning all of that is you've kind of talked about this discipline and consistency of like slowly and methodically building a community.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those things that I didn't know that it was needed. When I was working for several years one-to-one with clients, that was what I thought they needed exclusively. And I guess it's interesting because people who are starting a shoe brand or people who want to sell shoes, they are not really going to know anyone else in their network, in their personal networks, their work networks, who want to do the same thing. It's very rare that they're going to bump into someone who's doing exactly the same thing. So I hadn't really thought, wouldn't it be great to bring these people together so that they can learn from not only me, but also each other's experience. And actually it was more just, I wanted to create some more video content and I wanted to monetize it. That's why I was doing the monthly masterclasses. I wanted to cover some more in-depth topics, interview some more shoe brand founders, because I thought it had helped people so much when I packaged that up into the How to Start a Shoe Brand online course. And then it was more a sort of a way to package it that I started the membership. But when it actually started to form, that's when I saw the real benefits of it to people. And it's been like kind of knowledge squared in a way. It's sort of emotional support, it's sort of reassurance that it's difficult for everybody, me being able to give some professional knowledge as well. And it's just been a great vibe, and actually it's helped everyone to feel less alone and less like they're insane to be doing this. It's been a really, really good thing. But one thing I will say about when I started that membership, so there were sort of 3 iterations. So it started with the monthly masterclasses, and they were paid, and then I set up the membership, the shoe community, made a web page, started to promote it, and it was £40 a month, and I got 0 sign-ups, and I was like, no one really wants a community. And then I thought, okay, I'll just drop the price and see what happens. And then it worked. And then that, it was the right price, it was the right product. And if I had just said, no one wants a community, scrap that plan, it didn't work, then it wouldn't exist, and it wouldn't be, you know, the wonderful community that it is for everyone who's in it, and it also wouldn't be, you know, generating any monthly consistent revenue for me, which of course is a useful as a business owner.
Yeah, that's great. Interesting. That's you're right. I think it's sometimes we forget about that. Is you know, it's what retailers do all the time, right? Is that they test the market to see what the customer's appetite is, what the price, you know, what the right price point is, and I think more thought leaders, more kind of community builders could learn a very valuable lesson from that. Is sometimes it might not be that nobody wants your kind of you know, to share in the kind of collective wisdom, but sometimes it's maybe just understanding where the price point is. So it's a great insight. Before I lead into my final two questions, there's just one final thing I wanted to just pick your brain about. Is you mentioned along the way that you got other people to assist with helping to kind of create content. Just tell us a little bit about that, because I think it's something that we all, like, you know, a lot of people will probably be quite uncertain about. Is there's so many dynamics about having other people contribute to your kind of content. It's, you know, and I've always been fascinated by it, because every time I've had a mental block about it and I've got over that mental block, I've always been completely I suppose pleasantly surprised by just the generosity of people. And I think a lot of us tend to think, well, you know, I'm not going to ask that person, they're not going to be interested, or, you know, they're going to want to kind of get like some kind of remuneration from that. What has your experience been?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking back to when I started creating my first course, and yeah, I actually asked quite a lot of different people, and some people were saying, you know, I need to charge you thousands of pounds for this, and then I was like, okay, well, thank you, and I totally appreciate that, and I won't be able to do that at this point, because, you know, it's a totally untested product, and I don't have the budget, you know. And then some people were just really generous, and actually I was only asking for an hour of their time, and I know that of course that's really precious, and I really appreciated what they did, but, you know, compared to, I suppose, the thousands of hours that I put into creating the course, actually, I was just asking them things that they already knew, and yeah, there was a real sense of generosity. The people who did agree to do it, and there were quite a few people actually, yeah, and just. It's funny, isn't it? I think sometimes you can be quite scared to ask people, or feel like it's such an imposition. But I think you get to the point where you really, what is the risk? The risk is, okay, someone says, how dare you? You know, what's the worst that can happen? Someone says, absolutely not, you know, and no one said that, you know. So a few people said, sorry, you know, I can't, or I'm not interested, or, you know, I'd have to charge you. But it didn't hurt, you know. And then some people said yes, and people who I was, you know, really surprised and delighted to have them involved said yes. And this happened when I collaborated with the shoe photographer for the How to Photograph Shoes to Sell course. You know, there aren't many people who I know of in the UK who are expert shoe photographers. So I chatted to a couple, but Rian, who I ended up partnering up with, she was like, oh, wow, I'm so happy you asked me. Thank you for asking me. You know, and we collaborated on it together. You know, it's our course. But yeah, it was just sort of, I thought, oh, you know, this is taking a big risk, and I'm sure she's so busy, and you have all these assumptions. But actually, it might be a lovely thing for them to do. It just might be. And that's how it felt to the people who I have ended up collaborating with.
Yeah, that's a great example and a great story. And I think, we often tend to underestimate how much that just working with people, rewards us. So yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad you shared that. Yeah, I think so. Just closing out, I think there's so much valuable information that you imparted, and there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge and lessons learned. I want to ask you kind of maybe just a completely left field question at the end. Is you've done this as a kind of a business model. It's revenue generating. It's maybe even possibly lead generating at the end if people do the course and they realize actually this is quite complicated. I need someone to help me with this. So there's many different facets of doing this as a business model to kind of sustain you. The journey that you've been on, and if you were to think about now going inside an established business or a corporate where learning and development happens, what are the kind of some of the lessons and takeaways that you think might be missing in that type of world that could benefit from the experience that you've had doing learning and development as a self-sustaining business?
That's a really interesting question, and I think that there's actually a lot. And I think thinking back to when I worked in the corporate world and perhaps some of the courses that I asked to be sent on or I was sent on, and I think they just weren't very human-centered. They were sort of, okay, what does the business need? How can we sort of process these human beings, through this course into a slightly different type of human being with different knowledge, rather than sort of, okay, how do these people like to learn? How, what will be a really wonderful way for them to learn, which maybe doesn't involve a really soulless kind of meeting room and curled up sandwiches, and maybe someone with a monotone. I don't know. That's kind of the worst case scenario. Of course, I've been on better courses as well. There was a course provider who had free ice cream. But that would
Bribery.
But actually, just thinking about the courses, it's more just, how do people like to learn? What lights them up? Creating courses that capture people's imaginations, make them want to ask more questions, that feel more playful. I think humour is a very powerful thing, which is, one of my main kind of marketing points of education, I think, is if you can make someone laugh, you're connected with them. You've built a connection. I think, course providers of any kind, in the corporate world as well, would do well to, I don't know, lighten things up. Learning when we're children and we have a really good teacher feels like play. It feels like a wonderful. It feels like eating. Eating something really good, sort of consuming this new and fascinating knowledge. I feel like there could be more of that in the corporate world. Definitely.
Great answer. I completely agree. I'm a big fan of play and laughter, and we try and do it every day where I work. So we're a bunch of hooligans. Final question is, we always like to ask our guests to share a book, a podcast, anything that just had quite a profound impact on you recently, just to share that.
Okay, so when I was thinking about marketing my How to Photograph Shoes to Sell course, I'd had this book, Quiet Marketing by Danielle Gardner, on my kind of wish list for a while, and I thought, yeah, now's the time. I just need to read it. And luckily it's quite a short book, so I was able to kind of fit it into that finishing the course schedule. And it's really interesting. It gives you permission to market in the way that you like to market. So, finding whether it's a social media platform or email marketing or a bit of both, the things that you enjoy doing. So it's not going to feel like a chore and very hard to kind of keep up with. It's going to feel like, again, it's going to feel like play and creativity. So, I think I learned quite a lot from that book, just about, maybe I don't have to market in the way that, this marketing guru and this marketing guru and this marketing guru tell me, which 3 different ways. I don't have to do all of these things. There's only one of me. I'm not going to get a marketing agency to do this at this particular time. But I can pick, where do I enjoy spending time, in the virtual world? And just really do those things thoroughly and in depth. I think it's so easy for people to see how other people are marketing and communicating and think, I need to do it like that. And then it doesn't really come across very well because it doesn't sound like you. It sounds robotic, I think. And it's really hard for you to feel motivated. Again, if motivation comes up. But then, it's hard to be motivated to be consistent, which is what you need to do, of course, in marketing.
Sure. So that's a great share. I couldn't think of 2 words that belong together less than the words quiet and marketing. Yeah. So I think even the title is very intriguing, because I don't think many people would think of marketing as quiet. It's normally he who shouts loudest. But I love that idea about authenticity as well. And that, I think you're right. Is a lot of us get bombarded every day on all of the different social media channels, looking at people who we perceive to be very successful and thinking the route to success is to replicate those people, and often don't stop to think whether or not that's the right approach. So great share, thank you very much, and thank you for sharing your journey. Hopefully the learning how to take great pictures of shoes will be a shoe in. Had to use that. I apologize in advance. It was my one thing I had to try and squeeze in. But hopefully it'll be a great success. And thank you for sharing such a wonderful story, and full of great, observations, great lessons that not only people following a similar journey can take on board, but even people inside learning and development departments in businesses can actually take a lot of value out of this.
Excellent. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, Jason. And thank you for having me on the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Impact Learning Visionaries. If you found it interesting or helpful, please subscribe by clicking on the button down below so you don't miss our next one. Also, be sure to check out our Reality Bites blog for more information on how technology is aiding in learning development. Links are all in the description below. Go check it out. Thanks a lot. Bye.